Linda. I am the Director of Partnerships, and welcome to the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards competition workshop. Our today's focus will be personal essay, memoir, poetry, and fiction. So let's welcome Christopher Locke. He has 20 years of experience teaching high school and college students. He has a Master of Fine Arts in Poetry, an author of 12 books, and he has published poetry in over 100 magazines around the world and received over a dozen writing awards. So let's give a welcome to Chris.
Thank you very much, Linda, and Philip as well, for welcoming me here tonight. I'd like to say hi to ladies and gentlemen, all families out there. Hello, hope you're doing well. I'm coming to you from Essex, New York, which I don't know if you know where that is, but that's in the Adirondacks, northern New York, really cold, right on Lake Champlain. Snow today a little bit, so getting ready for the winter to kick in. As Linda was saying, I do have 20 years of teaching experience. This is in fact true. I've taught both at the college level as well as several boarding schools and private institutions throughout the Northeast and up and down the East Coast. Teaching writing, particularly teaching creative writing, is something I'm incredibly passionate about, and working with young people to accomplish this is something that I value more than just about anything else in my professional life. It's been wonderful to be successful as a writer, to have multiple books be published, but nothing gives me more joy than when I work closely with students, particularly one-on-one, and allow them to discover their voice so they can fully be able to embrace their creative side that I believe all students possess, and really, in a good way, exploit those strengths that they have as creative individuals. My students over the years have gone on to become successful writers, working in newspapers, published in literary magazines. Some have even had their own collections of poetry published. And I'm very happy to have been a part of that ongoing process as they move towards discovering who they are as writers and as young people. Now, for me personally, so you know a little bit about my process, I find that the only way that someone can become successful in writing is they have to feel, one, that they have a space where they can be vulnerable and authentic. And if the space that you provide as a teacher does not offer this and is filled with scrutiny or scorn, you will find that students will be less apt to take risks. Now, we already know that high school age students take risks already, right? But we want them to take important, safe, vital risks. That's the kind of risk that I'm talking about. And this risk is necessary for each student to be able to discover their voice and what it is they have to say as creative young people, as writers. So I always make sure that my space is welcoming. It doesn't discriminate. It always embraces the individual and allows them to fully be their authentic selves. That's number one, what's really, really important to me. And I mentioned this a little bit, but again, vulnerability is really the key to be able to discover what it is that a student wants to say and needs to say. And again, they will not be vulnerable if they feel they don't have the freedom and the support to do that. Now, I wanted to let you know in regards to competition, many of you may be familiar with Amanda Gorman. Amanda Gorman is a young woman who spoke and read a poem at the Joe Biden inauguration in January. Right now, that style of poetry, particularly for young people, is incredibly of the moment. It is incredibly hot, and it's sort of what publishers are looking for. So what they're looking for in particular are the voices of young people that discuss perseverance and hope. Perseverance and hope, with adversity included. So what my workshops would look to do is to be able to tease out these images that speak to the perseverance and really accentuate the idea of hope. I always bring in multiple poets. Their work, that is. Sometimes I'm able to actually bring other poets in, published poets, so they can read their work. But I will bring in writing that I think best demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about right now. We read that together as a class. We discuss what about it works, what we think doesn't work. And we look at the poetic process of really what a poem is is it's something called, I like to call, a felt thought. That is really what a poem is. It's a felt thought. And so when we work closely together and we read other work, the reading allows us to become better writers, and the more that we write allows us to become better readers. There's a symbiotic relationship between those two concepts. And so I make sure, again, to provide as many different voices as possible so my students can find out what fits them best, and then they can start to mine that territory within themselves, using as support the poems that we read. And I am incredibly, deeply supportive of each and every student that I've had, the hundreds of students that I've had over the years. Many still keep in touch with me. I get invited to their weddings. They tell me about their firstborns and so forth, and it's all very gratifying. And to see them going to college and start their own businesses. But really, I think if I could sort of tie this up here, and then I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, is that ultimately, if a poem is to be successful, I think that the individual has to have some kind of stake in that piece of writing. And without that stake and without that sense of ownership and commitment to real truth, to their truth, without that, the poem can never be as powerful and impactful and have the opportunity to change others' lives and to deeply move other people. So that's a little bit about my philosophy and why I'm so passionate about working with young people and why it's been successful for me for 2 decades. So Linda, if you'd like to jump in here, if there are questions, I'd be happy to entertain any questions, thoughts, ideas. But it would be a real honor to be able to work with your son or daughter.
Yes, thank you, Chris. We will open the floor now if anyone has any questions about the presentation or background or anything we just discussed. If someone wants to learn how to write poetry, what route would you suggest?
I would suggest first reading poetry. You need to know what's happening today in the world of poetry. So it's incredibly important that you devour as much as you can get your hands on. The only way that you can fully start to unlock that part of your creative self is by reading what it currently exists in this world today, in modern. Now, certainly, I think that knowing the masters, so to speak, both Western and Eastern, is incredibly important because you need to have a foundation from which to build upon. But it's very important that you look at what's happening currently, what's happening today. Who are the poets that are having the most impact and are receiving the most attention for their work? I think that is really the best way to begin, is by going to your local independent bookstore and talking to one of the clerks or one of the owners of the bookstore and saying, who is writing the poetry today that matters? Whose voice today is changing a generation? Ask these questions, and then you read their work and you see what resonates with you. You find out who speaks your own truth. Who do you connect with? Who is saying something that you felt you've always wanted to say yourself? And then you start to model your work after it, and you start to figure out ways to work towards an image that you want to create yourself, and a story that you feel is vital that you must tell. You tell that story, and that's a way to get towards it. So Linda, thank you for that question.
Yes, of course. Feel free to come off mute if you have any questions, or you could type it in the chat. I can read them out for you. Yeah. Could you share more details about the course on poetry?
Sure. I think it's incredibly important to get to know who I'm sharing a room with, either be virtual or an actual physical space. So we talk a little bit about ourselves first. We talk about what's important to us and why writing matters. So I think that's important to first do that, as we just get to know each other. Because again, if someone doesn't feel that the space that they occupy will welcome their authentic voice, they will be less apt to offer it up. So we talk about the process. We talk about why writing is important. Maybe there's no experience. Maybe someone's been writing poetry quietly in their room for months or even years and has never shared it. And there's a lot of fear. I understand there's a lot of fear around what will someone think about my poetry? And that's why I take precaution to really set up a space that allows them to feel safe so they can talk about it. So we do that first. We establish the rules about what is okay and not okay in the classroom. Ridicule is not okay. Everyone in the class is taking a real, as I said earlier, it's taking a real risk with their writing. So it's important that we nurture that and allow them to sort of travel down that path wherever it may take them. We also then will read different poems that I think are powerful, impactful, effective, dynamic, engaging. Poems don't have to rhyme. Poems don't have to be didactic in that they don't have to necessarily teach a lesson. Poems can be simple, but as long as they're unique, as long as the most important thing is that poems take a risk about something and they have something of value to add to this world, and they allow for an emotional resonance to occur between the reader and the page. That kind of connection has to happen. And then we start to work on our own writing. We'll start out small first, maybe work on 10 lines, 12 lines. I will provide a theme, perhaps, you know, I'll mention a theme that we're going to work on, and we'll write some poems, 12 lines, 14 lines, and thinking about what we read, and now we're writing our own poetry. And then what's very important is that we are able to share that work with each other in our classroom, our virtual world. We read it out loud and we support each other. We talk about the poem itself. And we talk about what really grabbed the listener, what really grabbed you, what was unique, what turn of phrase did you find really something you haven't heard before. And we support that and we discuss that. And then, you know, there's this old expression, came back in the early 20th centuries, you know, we learn about how to be the best editors possible. I teach in the class how to take out those words or lines that aren't helping the poem as a whole. They might be lines or words that are really interesting, but let's say they're not helping the larger piece, then we learn how to take that out. And there was an old expression, it was called killing your darlings. And it's this idea that you have to be a ruthless editor of your own work. You have to be willing to extract those lines or words or phrases or images that don't champion and add clarity and power to the poem as a whole. So if that makes sense, we learn how to become the best editors. We learn how to become really dynamic readers of our work. And we learn how to trust our ability to tell the truth that we need to tell in a poem, and find really unique ways to say it. So I know it's a lot of information, but that's how I go about in my class. And it's all about revision. Revision is the hard work, but revision is where the work really happens. It's one thing to get everything down on a piece of paper, but it's another thing to know how to revise, what to revise, how to make that poem better. Because I've always felt that once you write a poem, once you've created and it's written, it's no longer yours. It belongs to the world in some way. So your job now as the author is just to try to make it the best poem possible. And so we work on revision. So it's about seeing who's writing currently today, who's written poems that are effective and unique and engaging. Learning to start out small and slow and write our own lines based on what we've read and heard and talked about, reading that work out loud, sharing ideas as a group, sort of a roundtable type discussion to talk about what we liked, what we think needs more work, learning how to become your best editor of all your work, and then learning how to revise, because again, that's where the hard work happens. There's an old adage too that says, you know, and this always kind of makes me laugh, that, you know, revision is something that never really ends. You know, you never really complete a poem. You just kind of keep working at it in some ways, because that's sort of this really interesting idea that poetry is something that's always evolving and always changing. Just because you write it down once doesn't mean that it's like a marble statue and it's frozen. You can keep changing and adding to it and working to make it better. So that's how the process works within my classroom. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like we have a lot of passion in this course. There are a lot of questions relating to, you know, the Scholastic competition itself. So could you dive a little deeper in like the strategies or maybe some sort of skeleton on how this course is structured?
Sure. Well, again, I think that right now, what Scholastic is looking for is they're looking for that individual voice that really speaks to some type of struggle and some type of adversity, number one. And we all have it. Everyone right now who's on part of this chat right now has it. And it's about tapping into that and talking about perseverance. I think right now that's really an incredibly of the moment word that I think applies to particularly high school age writing. And again, I look back to Amanda Gorman and what she did during the inauguration. She sort of set that bar. So it's about what adversity has been encountered, how does one persevere, and ultimately what hope exists for that individual or family or friend or whoever the poem may be about. But I think that's what the poem needs to be. There has to be something at stake. A poem that's not going to work for the Scholastic competition is a poem, regardless of how artful it's written. But if there's nothing at stake, if it's just a poem that talks about the beauty of a museum or a flower garden, those poems are wonderful and they have their space in this world. But for this competition, more than likely, that's not a poem that's going to work. So it has to feel like a poem that's written by a real person about a real issue or struggle, and then how that speaker. And by the way, that's what I call every voice in a poem. It's never necessarily the person who wrote the poem, but you say the speaker in the poem, whoever that speaker may be, talks about this struggle or this adversity. Why and how is this speaker able to persevere? And then what hope exists? Because hope is something that I think is universal and is important and is really, again, I think the focus of where we need that poem to move towards. So I hope that makes sense. That's really, in regards to these types of competitions, particularly this one, that's the type of poetry we would look at. It's like, how do we work to move towards this idea of hope?
As just a wrap-up question, do you mind sharing like a poem of yours and just kind of elaborating that with us?
Okay, so I wrote a poem. It's in this magazine called, this national magazine called Rhino. I don't know if you can see it there, Rhino, which is a really wonderful poem. It published some of our best writers in the English language today. And I wrote one particular poem in here that was for my oldest daughter, Grace. And my daughter, Grace, she has a particular type of animal that she really loves. And I've always wanted to find a way to discuss that in a poem. But I wanted to find a unique way into the poem to discuss this real love she has for this particular animal. And my hope was, as I was moving through it and crafting the piece, that I'd end up somewhere surprising, as I said earlier. And I think I do, but I'll read the poem. And the poem's called Counting. My daughter Grace has a weakness for crows, points to one hopping the lid of the cafe dumpster, its shoulders oiled black as Elvis's pomp. And when we drive home, two crows tightrope the highway's yellow line, tap a squirrel pressed dry as a flower. Even as I speed past, they are fearless, pompous struts like federal judges before they sentence you to life. I will release my crows on an unsuspecting world, and they will do my bidding, Grace says. And I laugh. Imagine a wide cape of darkening sky as they fanned out behind her in a staccato of barks and cries. Home, the car ticks in the driveway as I stand in the yard, spy three adjourned in a sugar maple, silent, disapproving, their languorous stares unsure if they've noticed my face before. Grace startles me from behind, places a silver necklace in my hand. Leave it on the stump, she says, so they'll know it's theirs. And when I look back up, there are now four. So that's Counting.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.